What if the retirement number you've been grinding towards is wrong? Not because you saved too little, but because the model that produced it is built on an assumption that doesn't match reality. JP Morgan, they did something unusual a few years back. Instead of building another theoretical model, they went and looked at actual spending data from over 5 million real American households, people who had already retired and were living it. They were living the dream. And what they found, it actually contradicts some of the most widely repeated advice in retirement planning. Three big surprises, and honestly, at least one of them, it might make you feel a whole lot better about where you stand. My name is Rip. Welcome back to Rip Talks Money. Do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe, and let's get into it. Now, look, here are the assumptions. These are the assumptions that are baked into most retirement planning software, most of your online calculators, and a lot of professional advice. Your spending, it goes up every single year with inflation. Year after year for 30 or 40 years. Your withdrawals, they get a little bigger. 3%, maybe 2.5%, but it's always up. Now it sounds reasonable, right? Prices go up, so you adjust. But the problem is, that's not what's actually happening. JP Morgan, their data shows that real retirees, they don't spend that way. Spending in retirement actually follows a curve and not a line. It rises through your working years, it peaks somewhere in your late 40s and early 50s, and then slowly, consistently, it starts to come down. Not because your retirees are out there cutting corners, but because of how life actually changes. You stop commuting. You stop buying work clothes. Travel that was exciting at 67, it becomes harder at 80. The categories that decline, they end up outweighing the health costs that rise. Now, the upshot, right? Real retirees, their spending increases much more slowly than inflation. Your adjusted model assumes that about 1.9% annually in the early years, and then it actually starts to decline. That single correction, it changes a lot of the math. Now, here's where it gets concrete and where the numbers get pretty striking. If you model a 30-year retirement using a traditional inflation adjusted approach, assuming 3% annual spending increases, and you want, let's say, 90,000 a year in today's dollars, you end up projecting that by age 95, you're going to need 146,000 a year. Now that drives a very large required savings number. But JP Morgan, their real world data, it puts your average spending at age 95 closer to only about $90,000. The same amount as when you retired, not doubled. Now that's a $56,000 annual difference in projected needs, right? And when you run that through a savings model, what you actually need to accumulate to fund that retirement, that gap's around 26%. A traditional CPI based model, it might tell you that you need 1.2 trillion. The category based real world model, it puts it closer to 872,000 for the same exact lifestyle. No, that's not a rounding error, folks. That is a meaningful difference in how many years you need to work, how much you need to sacrifice today, and how much freedom you will actually have. Now, I'm not saying, plan to run out of money, but flexibility and a cushion, they matter here. But it's worth asking the question whether the number that you're actually chasing, was it built on assumptions that don't actually hold up in the real world? Which moves us to this surprise number 2, as I like to call it, the go-go, slow go, no-go framework. Now, JP Morgan's research, it breaks retirement spending into 3 distinct phases. And this framework is generally useful for thinking about your own plan. So take a little screenshot of this. Phase 1, they call it the go-go years, roughly ages 65 to 74. This is the most active phase, right? Travel, leisure, home renovations that you wanted to get done that you can now actually get done. Maybe you finally do that kitchen remodel you've been putting off for the past decade, or you take that trip that you've been talking about. Spending in this phase, it tends to increase about 1.9% a year. You're active, you're healthy, and you want to do things. Now, phase 2, this is what we call the slow go years. It's roughly around age 75 to 84, right? Activity starts to slow. Big trips, they start to become shorter trips. Home maintenance, it replaces home renovation. Now, spending still grows, but only about 0.5% a year. Think about that. Now, phase 3, this is the no-go years. This is typically around ages 85 and beyond. Spending actually starts to decline. It declines about 0.5% a year on net. Now, health costs, it rises, but they're more than offset by the drop in travel, dining out, entertainment, and transportation. You probably think about, why does this matter for your planning? Well, because it means your retirement, it probably isn't a flat line of withdrawals for 30 years. It's front loaded. You need more in years 1 through 10 than in years 20 to 30. That changes how you think about the sequence of withdrawals. And it connects directly back to what we talked about in episode 1 of this series with the sequence of return risk. Now, if you didn't watch that video, I suggest you go give it a watch. Now, let's talk about the retirement spending surge that nobody warned you about. Here's something interesting that JP Morgan found that a lot of people don't plan for at all, and it can definitely catch you off guard. In the 2 years before retirement and the 3 years immediately following it, many people experience a significant spending surge. JP Morgan, they found that it can actually run as high as 30% above their normal pre-retirement spending levels. Why? Well, great question. Because all of a sudden, you have time. You want to travel before any health issues emerge. Maybe you relocate. Maybe you renovate before you settle in. The hobbies that you kind of put to the back burner for decades, they're suddenly back. You're celebrating, and you should be celebrating. You deserve this moment. But here's the financial risk. Those early retirement years are exactly when your portfolio is most fragile. Now, we talked about this in episode 1. If you're overspending right at the start and the market, it has a rough patch, at that same moment, you're selling assets at a low price while also withdrawing extra money out. Now, that combination right there, that can do permanent damage to a portfolio that looked perfectly fine on paper. The fix, it's simple. And the fix isn't not to spend money. It's to plan for the surge. Know it's coming. Budget for it specifically. And ideally, have that cash buffer already set aside so the celebration doesn't come at your portfolio expense. Surprise number 3. Most retirees, they don't spend in a straight line. Here's the third finding that really stood out to me from JP Morgan's research. 56% of retirees, they experience major spending fluctuations. More than half. And those fluctuations, they're not random. JP Morgan found that they cluster into 6 identifiable patterns. Some people, they're steady eddies, very consistent spending throughout retirement. Some are what we call the downshifters, who gradually reduce spending over time. Others, the upshifters, their spending actually grows. And then you have the temporary downshifters and the temporary upshifters. Those are the people who dip or spike for a period, but then they come back to their baseline. And finally, you got the roller coasters. Significant volatility throughout the whole retirement. I know people like that. Now, the point isn't to memorize these labels. The point is that retirement spending, it's personal, it's unpredictable, and it's dynamic in a way that a rigid rule-based withdrawal system, it doesn't account for it. The 4% rule is a tool. Remember that. It's not a law. It's designed conservatively enough that 90 to 95% of people who follow it, they end up with more money at the end of retirement than they actually started with. That's actually a lot of people leaving a lot of money on the table that they didn't have to. Which brings us to a question that it's, in my opinion, it's definitely worth sitting with. Are you planning to fund a life, or are you planning to protect a number? Think about that. So what's the practical takeaway from all this? First, if you've been building towards a saving number from a calculator that assumes fixed 3% spending inflation for 30 years, it is definitely worth revisiting. The required number, it might be meaningfully lower than you think, especially if you're a good candidate for a flexible category-based approach. Second, plan specifically for the early retirement surge. Just set aside a dedicated bucket for travel, for renovation, and for celebration. Not as an afterthought here, but as a real line item in your retirement plan. Don't let the most expensive years hit an unprotected portfolio. Third, build flexibility into your withdrawal strategies from the start. The people who navigate retirement well, they're not the ones who locked in a number from the start and never deviated from it. They're the ones who could spend more in the good years and they could dial it back in the lean ones. And always remember, finance is personal, everyone. JP Morgan's data, it reflects averages across millions of people. Your retirement might look like a go-go phase that lasts you all the way into your 80s, or a slow go that starts early. The framework is a map. It's not a GPS. So that's what JP Morgan's 5 million household study actually says, and why it matters if you're anywhere near thinking seriously about retirement. The headline that most people are probably saving towards a number that's bigger than reality, it requires a built-on model that doesn't match how real retirees actually spend. Now, that doesn't mean go out there and just stop savings. It means the picture might be less grim than that calculator online actually suggests. If this was useful, and I hope it was, hit that like button. It helps this channel find the new people out there on YouTube that need to hear this stuff. And drop a comment down below and tell me, does this change how you think about your own retirement strategy? I know it has for me, and I read all the comments. New video every week, new schedule Monday, Thursday. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Turn on those notifications. I'm Rip, and I'll see all y'all on the next one.